Thank you for your patience. What we're going to see is Sam Hughes' Tucson. And Sam Hughes, you'll learn a little bit about him. For those of you who don't know, a lot of you certainly do know. But Sam Hughes was one of Tucson's earliest Anglo pioneers, Welsh pioneers, I should say. And his contribution to the community, to education, is actually pretty remarkable. And one of his mottos, oft-quoted, was, "My hobby is building a town." So this is the town that Sam built. We start at the west end of town from the mountain, which today we call a mountain, was often called Sentinel Peak. We're looking west, or looking east across the valley at the town itself. And we're going to take a look at that town a little bit more closely as we walk through it and see the scenes, the streets, the people that Sam encountered every day. For those of you who are familiar with Tucson, this is what's called the Central Business District. This is the heart of town. We're looking north on Main Street at Congress. Congress and Main. Congress and Main. On the left, on the right-hand side is Sam Drachman's store. On the left-hand side is the offices of the Tucson Citizen, the newspaper. Behind them, Zeckendorf, which is the predecessor to Steinfeldt's, and many of you will remember the Steinfeld store. And we'll move into this scene. I'm sorry that all these pictures, I should tell you, were taken in 1874. They're the earliest photographs that we have of Tucson as a series. They were taken by the photographer Henry Buman, and these are there's this whole series taken right around November of early November, or actually maybe even late October. So it would have been just about this time of year in 1874. We're looking north up Main Street with the Zeckendorf store on the left-hand side. You can see the heavy freight wagons coming into town. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds of merchandise were moving into the town almost daily. Tucson was the capital of the territory of Arizona. The governor lived here. The legislature met here. It was a town incredibly busy, prosperous at this time, and you'll get a little bit of an idea of the streets that Sam walked down and what he saw. We've turned around, we're looking south and east at the same corner, Main and Congress. That's Congress Street that we're looking at, and the building is Lord and Williams. They were almost all of the merchants were general merchandise dealers. Many of them had specialties. Lord and Williams, as we'll see in a moment, had a wholesaled and retailed liquor and other things. The post office was located in this building. The United States Depository was located here. The payroll for the soldiers stationed at Camp Lowell was in this building, and the office of the Tucson and Yuma stage line was right next door. The sign hanging up on the corner, a pistol, it points down the street to a gun shop, and you can see that the merchants right down in this central part of town have put in stone sidewalks. which is a very good thing, especially if you look at the street. It's obviously just rain. You imagine yourself a lady with long skirts dragging on the ground, and you would be very happy to have those sidewalks there to keep your skirts out of the mud. There's the Lord and Williams building and the office of the Tucson and Yuma stage line right next door. You can just see the wheel of one of the stagecoaches. And notice the handy wastebasket right outside the front door. It was against city ordinance then as now to throw trash in the streets, and people paid about as much attention to littering then as they are not littering then as they do now. About every once a week or so, the chain gang from the jail would come around and keep the streets clean. Now we're looking south along Main Street. This is the Lord and Williams building on the left, and the Jacobs building on the right. Those trunks and things piled up against the wall are from a shipment of merchandise just come in from California on freight wagons. Whenever that happened, they put a big advertisement in the newspaper: grand opening, new merchandise, and specials today, and so forth. So these are the streets that Sam walked. Looking east up Congress Street, the Drachman store is on the left, and on up the street, on the right, the Lord and Williams building, which we just saw. And we're going to go up the street, and this is the territory's first lending library. The Pioneer News Depot and Cigar Store, which belonged to Sam Mansfeld. And right next to him, you can see the rifle sign hanging out. Oh, that's the gun store of John Vosburgh. John Vosburgh advertised himself a practical gunsmith. That means that his main trade was gunsmithing, but he was also a piano tuner and a locksmith. Now you can imagine in Tucson in 1874 how many pianos there were. On the fingers of one hand, maybe, with change. And nobody locked their doors, so gunsmithing was really his trade.
Why is the adobe there with no stuff?
Because most people did not have the money and the need to stucco the adobe. I mean, it lasted, and you fixed it, and so forth. But we were very surprised when we started identifying these pictures that there were as many stuccoed and whitewashed buildings as there were. This is the Gem Saloon on the corner of Congress Street and North Meyer, and then on down from that, the barber shop. You could get a shave, haircut for 15 cents, baths for those people who took baths. Well, a lot of people took a bath once every Saturday night, whether they needed it or not. And then on up the street, the drugstore of Charlie Myers. And look at the barber pole, by the way, in front of the barber shop. Red, white, and blue striped with a gilded rooster on the top. Here's the same corner, the Gem Saloon. And these are some of Sam Hughes's townspeople. The two brothers standing side by side in front of the carriage are the Drachman brothers, Philip and Sam. John Wasson, the editor of the Citizen, up in the driver's seat of the buggy. And then there's a group which we'll see right here. George Cooler, the owner of the Gem Saloon, is standing at the corner with his top hat on. Charlie Meyer, the druggist, standing next to him. Fred Maish, Tom Driscoll, butchers and ranchers, with his feet crossed in front. That's Sam Drachman, his brother Philip behind, and John Vosburgh, the gunsmith, on the far end with a fancy pair of pants with breeches with doeskin reinforcements at the knee. And there's the bathhouse, right, or the barbershop and bathhouse behind. A little farther up Congress Street, you can see the sign for the barber shop and the drugstore, and there's a pile of adobes there. Urban renewal in 1874. This was the home of Francisco Leon that had been taken down to open Meyer Street north of Congress. On further up the street, the bakery and confectionery store of John George Huck. Here's the whole street again from the corner all the way up, and these guys are standing in front of Lord and Williams, which we saw earlier. We're going to go to the plaza. This is the Cathedral Church, San Agustin, faced west on what we used to call La Placita. If some of you from Tucson will remember that. The church plaza, so those of you who are familiar with the downtown will know where the statue of Pancho Villa stands. This is about right where the statue would be, just about where the front door of the church is. This church was built beginning in 1863, and it was, when it was completed, Bishop Salpointe became the presiding bishop here. Next to it, on the far right, the building is the convent of the Sisters of St. Joseph, who came in 1870, set up a girls' school, and eventually built the hospital of St. Mary's Hospital. In later years, the church had a stone facade. Those of you who come and visit the Historical Society, if you see the look of the center of the facade of this church, you will see the stone facade on the face of the Historical Society today that was salvaged when this building was destroyed and torn down in 1938. So remember that look if you come, and you'll see what it looks like. Okay. We've gone to the east end of town, all the way to the east end of town, Stone Avenue. We turn around and we're looking west. Stone Avenue is the east, Main is the west, and we're looking west down Congress Street. At this point, most of the houses, most of the buildings are residences or houses. Some of them are pretty elementary. How'd you like to live there? It's fine until it rains. The houses all had dirt roofs, and the water would run off. And the theory was, that you stack a bunch of dirt on the top, adobe on the top, and when it rained, which was not very frequently, the water would run off, and you didn't need to worry about it. Now, sometimes, not very often, but sometimes it would rain slow and light for a long time, maybe days and days off and on. And when that happened, the foot or so layer of adobe that was on your roof would get wet, and the water would soak through. This is when you water your garden. The water would soak down to the bottom of the adobe roof, which was the ceiling of the house. And when it did that, it dripped inside. And not only did it drip water, it dripped mud. And when that happened, you had to cover up all your furniture and valuables. And there are occasionally, you'll see references in the newspaper, there is literally not a dry spot in town except under a wagon someplace. So life on this frontier was not the easiest and the most genteel place to live. We've gone down west a little ways on Congress Street, and we are at the corner of Congress and Court. Congress and Court, which is about where the county building is right now. Looking west, on the right-hand side is a second-hand store called, whoops, I better go to the left first. On the left-hand side is the first tall building is the Congress Hall Saloon, owned by a guy named Charles O. Brown, whose home is still standing on West Broadway. the Congress Hall Saloon, named because for one of the stories about how it got its name was that the legislature met in the saloon before they found a permanent house. So then further down the street there are the white building is the Davis and Kelson tinsmith shop, and we'll see that a little bit closer, I think. And that's they handled iron goods, stoves. They did tinsmithing, and they were also jewelers. So people had to be kind of jacks of all trade. There's the building on the right-hand side. This is a second-hand store. And you'll notice, as many of the buildings in Tucson at this early time, there wasn't any glass. Now, it wasn't, not that there wasn't any glass, it's just that glass was expensive. It had to be brought overland by wagon, and so many people did not have glass in their windows. And instead of windows, they figured you may as well have the benefit of a door. So these are doors, and in the summertime you opened the doors and the air conditioning came through, and in the wintertime you closed the doors and lit the fireplace up. The post that is stuck at an angle at the corner in this building, anybody want to guess what that post is for? It doesn't hold the building up.
To keep the wagon wheels
It
away
keeps
from
the wagon wheels. If a big freight wagon or wagon turned the corner too sharply, the big hub sticking out on that wagon would take a huge gouge out of the adobe corner of that building, and so that post was to deflect a wagon wheel and protect the corner of the building. We're going back down the way we came up. Do you remember that? Here's the bakery and confectionery store that we saw at the far end before. There's Charlie Meyer standing out in front of his drugstore. If you look carefully, you'll see the pole, the barber pole there, and then you see how the land just drops down. It stair steps down past Main Street. The valley slopes off rather rapidly, and all the way at the end is the blacksmith shop of Charles T. Etchells. This is the Tucson restaurant, owned by a guy who, in today's world as a restaurateur, would not make it without changing his name. His name was Joseph Newgas. The crowd gathered in front is a typical group of Sam Hughes' townspeople, all well known to him. We can take a little closer look. This, by the way, there's a butcher shop at the end, at the south end of the restaurant, and you can see the butcher standing out there with his knife and sharpening hone. And there are two slabs or sides of beef hanging from the rafters there. So you would go to the butcher shop and order what you wanted, and he'd cut it off for you. Some of the other folks standing there on the right, on the left, is George Roscrooge. In the center is Henry Buman, the photographer, which begs the question, who took the picture? And on the right, one of our family friends, L.C. Hughes. This guy I originally thought was Leopoldo Carrillo. Now I'm not real sure who it is, but he's a very distinguished gentleman. And wearing, as most gentlemen in public, wearing a vest, a coat, and a tie in Tucson. Contrary to what Hollywood would like you to believe about the Wild West, there were many gentlemen. We're looking.
Did they dress? This is October, November. Did they dress that way later on?
Yes. Yes. We're looking north up Meyer Street to Congress, and on the left-hand side, the horse is standing in front of the saloon of George Hand, And any of you who remember, there used to be a column in the newspaper of George Hand's diary, and he always had some very interesting and spicy things to say. This is the Pima County Courthouse, located on Court Street, just north of Pennington. The corral on the right-hand side, you can just see the corner of the corral, was Bob Leatherwood's corral and livery stable. The courthouse housed the offices, county offices, and a courtroom, a sheriff's office, and it served as kind of a community center. There were itinerant Protestant ministers who would come and preach Sundays here. There were plays given here, recitals given here, and the courthouse. You notice the building is adobe on the sides. The courthouse they felt needed some dignity, and what they did was to plaster the facade, stucco the facade, and rather than whitewashing it, they struck and painted it to look like red brick. In spite of all this facade, it had a dirt floor, as did almost every other building in town. Only the main merchants had wooden floors and could afford them. Now remember, this is before the days of the railroad bringing in lumber from California. If you wanted wood for anything, you went out into the Santa Rita Mountains with wagons and brought the lumber back and sawed it by hand into planks. And so you can imagine how expensive wood would have been. Or of course, the finished wood doors and so forth were brought into town overland by freight wagon. Now, very interesting, on the very north end of this building, the white plastered building with a white stuccoed facade, was the home of Augustus Brichta, purchased by Sam Hughes in 1873, the year before, and made into the first public school in Tucson. And we'll see that a little bit closer in a second.
I have a question. You were talking about wood being so scarce.
Yes.
There's been some controversy as far as whether there was a lot more water available.
Water.
I mean, that's in riverbeds,
The
that.
question has to do with water. We'll talk about it a little bit in a minute. Water was much more available because the ground table was much higher, and most of these people, certainly the people who had nicer houses, the wealthier people, had wells in their yard, and a well was dug 20 or 30 feet down at the most, and you had water. Now, the problem with the well water was that, and if any of you have dug in our ground here more than 6 or 8 inches, you run into caliche. So the water was very alkaline, and there was drinking water available for those who could afford it, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
The Santa Cruz ran
The
continuously.
Santa Cruz did not run, contrary to what a lot of people think. The Santa Cruz River did not run past Tucson. It did run south of Tucson about a mile or so. It sank into the ground and literally ran underground all the way up to near Picacho Peak, where it resurfaced and continued up to its where it flows into the Gila and the salt. Okay, let's go on up the street a little bit. There's the school right next to the courthouse, the first building with the first 2 downspouts. And up the street, you can see the poles of the military telegraph coming from the north. The military telegraph was put in 1873, and we'll see the the telegraph office in a minute. But the interesting thing for many of you about this picture, one of the interesting things, you see at the end of the white buildings, the street is Alameda Street. So this is north on Court and looking at the intersection of Alameda. The house right where the tree is was the home of L.C. Hughes. And that home stood for many, many years. Sadly, it was torn down. There's I can't remember what the name of the building is that's there now. Do you remember, Dick? Transamerica. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. That's the home of L.C. Hughes, and it was called for many years the Governor's Corner because L.C. Hughes was one of the territorial governors. There's the whole street scene looking north. The two gentlemen holding up the telegraph pole there are standing, and if you look past them, you will see the building that's back in the background is on what's called the Buckaloo Block, and that building served as the hospital for Camp Lowell when the camp, before the camp was moved out to the present location in 1870. Dave? Thanks. Yeah, that's what I thought. So by the time this picture was taken, they had already moved moved the post out to Fort Lowell. By the way, these funny-looking things on the left-hand side up above are drain spouts or canales. And as I said, the roofs were packed adobe, and they had channels on top of the roof that channeled the runoff into these little valleys, and they would run out those drain spouts. And you will see in this picture, well, we'll see this in a moment. This is standing in the front door of the courthouse, looking southwest. This is the home of L.C. Douglas, who was a rancher, and you can see the wall on the side of his house. There are, well, I'll go back to it a second. Those are California pepper trees planted in his yard, and so you can see that he has water back there. Here's Mr. Douglas, who, as Sam did, married a local girl. This is Melquiades Elias, his wife, seated beside the door with one of their daughters, and their son Orlando beside his father, and one of the servants holding the baby in the doorway. Like most typical Tucson homes, this house was built in a very typical pattern. The door went into a hallway, or what's called a saguan, and the hall went all the way through the house. And the doors could be opened on both sides, and it would allow air to come through. There was one room in each of the four corners, frequently a hallway going the other direction as well. The shutters and the windows have a very specific purpose. The ceilings were real high, and when the sun came out in the morning and the sun beat down on the roof, the heat would start building up at the high in the inside, and it would, by the middle of the day, would get down to where you could start feeling it. At that point, you would close the windows. I will say in the morning the windows were open, the shutters were closed to keep the sun out of the windows. In the afternoon, wait a minute. In the morning, the windows were closed to keep the cool air in, and the shutters were closed. In the afternoon, you would keep the shutters closed to keep the sun off of it, open everything up when it got too hot, and frequently move outside. Most of the cooking in the summertime was done outside. Most people slept outside in the summertime. And those are up on the roof, coming out of the wall. Those are canales or drain spouts. and you can see the muddy water when it comes out of them splatters up against the side of the house. So you don't want to walk anywhere close to them when it's raining. Once a year or so, you would have to get up on your roof and fix the gullies that had eroded. This is the home of Hiram Stevens on the north end and Edward Nye Fish on the south. This house is still standing. It is on the Tucson Museum of Art block. It faces west on Main Street. And these, I apologize, are kind of dark, but there is Edward Nye Fish standing in the doorway of his house with his wife. This little, you can't see it very well, but this is a cart, a two-wheel cart this is a water cart, and the waterman would come around once a day and you could buy a bucket of water for a nickel. That sounds pretty reasonable until you start thinking about it in terms of, we gripe about our water costs, but if you start putting all those buckets together into cubic feet, and we use how many hundreds of cubic feet a day, you'll see that the water was not all that reasonable. This is Hiram Stevens, who was Sam Hughes' brother-in-law, standing outside his front door with his pet mockingbird in a cage beside him. Hiram Stevens married Petra Santa Cruz, who was Atanasia, Sam's wife's sister. And Atanasia and Hiram Stevens lived in that house where he is standing. This is a garden outside the Stevens house and on the west side of Main Street, and we think that these may be grapes. We're not quite sure.
They've announced Cliff, and so we're going to, those who are, the descendants are going to need to go outside for a few moments.
Okay.
For Cliff's presentation.
Okay. Do you want? I can finish this up pretty quick.
Okay.
You want to do that? It'll be a little easier.
'Cause they
I'll
just
I'll kind of zip through this stuff. But this one you do want to see.
Yes, there's that.
This one you want to see. This is the house on North Main Avenue, and Sam on the left and Hiram Stevens on the right. And those kind of crib-looking things are to protect the trees and keep the horses from eating the bark. The house is still standing. This is the Cosmopolitan Hotel at the corner of Pennington and Main Street. Another one of those boards up on the corner. The group standing here. The telegraph office was located in this building, and it was the only real hotel in town. This is the parade welcoming Hiram Stevens back into town after his triumphal election as delegate to Congress from the territory of Arizona in November of 1874. See the crowd, and the sign H.S. Stevens for delegate is not the picture isn't backwards. It's just that this is painted on a piece of muslin and hung out on the street looking the other direction, so we're seeing right through it. There's Stevens' carriage coming up the street and the crowd, and they were marched up and down through town, and they were all invited to his home afterwards. One of the typical houses down along South Main Street. This is the flour mill that Edward Nye Fish owned down on South Main Street. The mountain in the background. This mill produced about 3,000 pounds of flour a day, and in spite of that, it was not enough to keep up with the population. They had to import flour from Hayden's mill up in what is now Tempe, and from down in Mexico. This is the mill from the back out in the fields. It was a very artsy shot for its time. This is the water source of this. It was called El Ojito, the artesian well on the west side of Main Street, very close to where what we now call the Wishing Shrine. And this is where they loaded the carts with water, and they would take them around the town. Another shot of the artesian well. We're looking east toward Main Street, and you can see how much lower this is. It's down, right down off the bank. This is the other necessity, firewood, and the man with the firewood would walk through the town, and you would buy right off the backs of the burros as much wood as you would need for cooking and heating that day. Down along the acequia, which or the water ditch that ran along the west, right just on the west side of town, the Indian women would do laundry, and you can see they scrubbed it on stones and using lye soap, and hung it out to dry on the bushes. This is the road leading out west of town, over the fields and to the ruin of the old convento, which was already in ruins, built about the same time as San Javier Mission, and the object now of kind of a community hope to at least somehow restore and interpret the site. There's nothing left of it, sadly. Another very typical home. This was Sam's friend W.J. Osborne, who was a man of many talents. All of his titles. He was a judge and just a number of things. But here is a typical Tucson home, and Judge Osborne is sitting outside. His wife standing behind him, and you can see that she's tried to make this rough adobe house a little more livable by putting lace curtains up in the windows.
In spite of dirt floors.
In spite of dirt floors. We're on the west side of the valley now. This is one of the little roads leading through the fields, and some of the pomegranate trees that were planted all the way back in Spanish times. And there were many water ditches which crisscrossed the valley and irrigated the fields, and there was a water master, or a sanajero as he's called, who would say exactly how much water each of the fields would get and when they would get it, and his word was law. This is the ruin of the convento itself. Very impressive building. Long gone. It was it had already started falling into ruin in the 1840s. It was originally it served a number of purposes, but was never actually a mission. But I think it may have been established at one point to be a mission type structure. Now we're going to take a look out over the whole town, back up from the mountain where we started, and that'll be it. We're looking east at the north end of Tucson, across the fields, and if you go up, I hope those of you who are from out of town will have the opportunity to drive up on a mountain today and look out over what you are seeing in these scenes. This is about Franklin Street, the very north end of the town, and you see the many little fields. We're looking out across the town. This building here with the two doorways is still standing. It's today called Old Town Artisans, a block or so from where Sam Hughes' house was.